Hi everyone, welcome to the case studies session on technological issues brought to you by Sunya IAS in its ethics course. So, case studies of technological issues have not appeared much in the UPSC GS4 examination. However, since science and technology forms an important part of GS paper 3 and the advances and inventions have been improving at a rapid pace, there is a possibility that different topics in science and technology can be asked in the ethics paper in the near future. So, this session on case studies on technological issues is very important just to know the kind of questions that can be asked and to practice a few case studies in this domain. So, a lot of inventions these days have an ethical dimension attached to it. It is regularly discussed in the news shows and newspapers. So, inventions like artificial intelligence or satellite technology or space debris removal technology, right? So, things like these have ethical dimensions, and these are discussed in the news shows why people are wary of such scientific developments, and you should keep an eye out for them when you are reading the newspaper. It is essential to understand the technology to be able to form an opinion on the ethical dimension of it. Unless and until you understand what the technology is and how it is going to be used, what are its applications, which fields it is going to be used in, you won't be able to analyze the ethical dimension, right? Then there is no need to explain the technical aspects or technical details of any technology in the case study. It is not science and technology paper or GS paper 3. This paper is ethics paper and you don't need to mention these technical details. You might only be asked about the impact of the technology's usage and the moral values which are involved in its development or the effects that it is creating, right? So examples of topics in which such case studies can be asked: human cloning. So basically, human cloning is a very sensitive topic where you clone an entire human being in the lab. So it is very important to understand the ethical dilemmas involved in human cloning. Clinical trials, this can be one of the questions that can be asked because the coronavirus vaccine development did not have proper procedures followed for clinical trials, vaccination approval process. So even the vaccination approval process is flexible these days, especially for COVID vaccine development. So ethical issues in this can be asked. Then three-parent baby. This was one of the inventions recently, and it is very interesting to understand how the three parents are involved in this particular scientific innovation and what are the ethical dilemmas in this, right? Surrogacy is a very important topic, especially with the surrogacy bill that has outlawed commercial surrogacy in India. So we need to understand the ethical dimensions of surrogacy, right? One more thing, whenever such a question is asked where there's a law banning a particular thing, for example commercial surrogacy here, please try to take a viewpoint which is sensible and which is acceptable in the country as of now. So please go ahead with altruistic surrogacy, and if you say that you support commercial surrogacy in an ethics case study, please substantiate it properly and mention the safeguards and checks and balances that you will keep so that it is not misused, right? So please mention those if you are supporting commercial surrogacy which is not actually being supported at the national level, right? Genetically modified crops, this is one of the favorite areas of UPSC while asking environment based questions. So you need to understand what are the ethical dimensions here as well. Automation replacing human beings, this is already happening. So now we are moving towards internet 4.0, um, which is basically Internet of Things, right? So the machines and the devices are going to be connected using internet, and that is going to replace a lot of human beings and human interaction and human beings working in the supply chain. So what are the ethical issues involved in this? Then data protection and privacy laws. This has been an important topic of discussion both on the domestic as well as the international front. For instance, a lot of corporates were involved in hacking and in generating spyware and in tracking what people are doing using the data. So all of this has been in news, and you should be aware of the pros and cons of privacy laws and data protection, and especially what is the legal and constitutional scenario in India regarding data protection laws. Then you have virus, ransomware, ethical hacking. You have Pegasus, which is recent, and other ransomware, spyware, etc., which has been in the news for quite some time. And there's another dimension of this which is called ethical hacking. So, what exactly is ethical hacking, and should it be done or not, right? So, this is something that can be asked in the ethics paper. Then you have climate engineering. Again, global warming is a very favorite topic of UPSC, and climate engineering is something where we use science and technological advancements to modify the climate. For instance, we form artificial clouds or we seed clouds so that it rains, and we can get some artificial carbon sequestration done, right? So all of these things are a little controversial, and we also need to understand the ethical dimensions to it. Digital divide. This is in the context of demonetization and later on, wherein a lot of people had to move to digital payments, and there is a huge divide between haves and have-nots in terms of people having access to a computer or a smartphone and people who do not have access to it, right? So this digital divide has been increasing day by day, and since the entire world is becoming digital, there are a lot of opportunities available through internet, right? So imagine there's a boy in a village who is trying to search for a job. He does not have access to a computer and a smartphone, so he will just go by word of mouth, or he'll apply to places where he finds an advertisement in the newspaper. However, imagine the same person in a city who has access to a basic computer and a smartphone, and that person has such a wide range of websites and uh, recruitment centers open to him, right? So the way he applies and for jobs and the way he gets himself recruited is going to be much easier and smooth as compared to the boy who is living in the village without access to digital devices, right? Artificial intelligence, again, this is something which is very controversial these days, because a lot of corporates are trying to invent different softwares who can use the artificial intelligence and machine learning to help smoothen out processes and to reduce human involvement. But this is going on uncontrolled as of now, and a lot of scientists have highlighted the dangers of artificial intelligence. So this is something that can be asked in the ethics case studies. Self-driving cars. When the cars are self-driving and an accident occurs, who will be held responsible, right? So, what if someone hacks the car? What if there was a technological malfunction? How will the inquiry happen, right? So, all these things have to be taken into consideration. And genetic modification here, I mean DNA re-engineering or RNA re-engineering, not only in crops but in human beings and animals. How ethical is that, right? So we begin with our first case study. Cambridge Analytica, a London-based elections consultancy firm, was one of the many data analytics companies which use data from social networking sites for academic research purposes. The data was allegedly used to micro-target the voters in favor of Donald Trump during the United States of America presidential elections of 2016. Further, the data was also used to turn the Brexit referendum in favor of Leave campaign and Mexican general elections in 2018. So here, this is a current affairs based real life case study, right? You have Cambridge Analytica, which is an elections consultancy firm based out of London. What it does is it analyzes the many data points available, right? This company has used data from social networking sites, and the reason it gave to analyze them was that it is doing so for academic research purposes. However, what it did was it used the data available from social networking sites to micro target voters in favor of Donald Trump. So they uh, they conducted a campaign. They customized the communication to influence the choices of these voters in favor of Donald Trump during the USA presidential elections of 2016. Further, this same process was used to turn the Brexit referendum in favor of the Leave European Union campaign, and it was also used in the Mexican general elections in 2018. So the possible electoral manipulations through various surveys by the daughter companies of Cambridge Analytica is presently under scanner in India too, as various political parties like Indian National Congress, Janata Dal United, etc. have been clients of these companies. So there is a case where it is suspected that INC and JDU have used the services of daughter companies of Cambridge Analytica to manipulate electoral results as well, right? Facebook initially was defensive in its approach and denied such breach. So when Facebook got to know that its data had been used, it completely denied and said that this can't happen, this has not happened. There was a lack of follow-up action by Facebook upon knowledge of use of data by third party, such as Cambridge Analytica, and lack of deletion of such data later on. So the loophole was that Facebook did not uh, find out what these companies were doing after this particular data was used by the third party, how it was being used, and whether it was being deleted after the academic research or not, right? So later, Facebook founder and chief executive officer Mark Zuckerberg publicly apologized for the breach of trust of the millions of users on account of the scandal and promised to take corrective measures towards data protection. So later on, the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, when he understood that this has been breach of trust of the public whose data is stored with Facebook, right? Whoever uses Facebook, he apologized and promised to take corrective measures. So the questions that you need to answer are: identify the ethical issues involved, identify the stakeholders and their interests. If you were the COO of Facebook, what steps would you take in the above situation? And as the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, would you justify what the company does, that is data analytics, as correct? Why? Right, so there are four parts to this particular question. It's of 20 marks, so you should equally divide it in these four subparts. Coming to the analysis of the case, Cambridge Analytica is an elections consultancy firm. It is a data analytics company. So what a data analytics company does is that it analyzes the huge amounts of data generated through online transactions, online use of Facebook or other social networking sites, and tries to understand the patterns uh, and tries to predict the behavior of different people based on the parameters that it thinks are statistically significant. Data analytics basically involves use of statistics as well as technology and different programming languages. They use the insights gained from the analysis of data to either target or a behavior of a particular person, or nudge him lightly to change or choose a particular option, right? So this is what Cambridge Analytica does. It used data from social networking sites for academic research purposes. That was the intent of the agreement, to use data from social networking sites. but instead it used to micro target the voters in favor of Donald Trump during USA presidential elections of 2016. So it basically used data analytics to make people vote for Donald Trump, right? So it influenced the choices. This was also used to turn the Brexit referendum in favor of Leave campaign, exit European Union campaign, right? So this is one of the other places where this has been used, and one of the other places is Mexican general elections in 2018. Now there are possible electoral manipulations by daughter companies in India also. So some political parties have used to manipulate electoral results. Apparently, this has not been proved, but it is suspected. So International Congress and Janata Dal United are some of the clients of Cambridge Analytica's daughter companies in India, right? And Facebook was initially defensive and denied such breach at all. Then later on it realized that there was lack of follow-up action upon knowledge of use of data by third party. So once they were given the data, what were they doing with the data, right? Were they restricting its usage to the agreed purposes or not? And there was lack of deletion of such data later on. So this was another thing that was highlighted. Later, Mark Zuckerberg publicly apologized for the breach of trust, that so many of its users' data was used without their consent, and this means that the trust has been broken, and he promised to take corrective measures towards data protection, right? Coming to the questions, the first part of the question is ethical issues. So one thing is that there is a breach of trust by Facebook. Facebook has not kept up its promise of treating the user's data as private and keeping it safe, right? Then way of usage by data analytics companies. So how data analytics companies use it to influence the behavior of different users, and how they use it to use behavioral psychology on them to change their choices and all. So it's not very ethical. Then you have uh, privacy versus business interests. So it is in the interest of users or the public to keep their data private, and this is in direct conflict with the interest of business to use that data to generate profits or the actions that it desires. Then data protection and the right to be forgotten. Right, so this is one of the issues that has been in news for quite some time, and data protection is basically protecting data available with different stakeholders, for example, the government, hospital, medical records, with the schools about the grades and the degrees, and the right to be forgotten. So if a person does not want to be remembered anymore, he should have the right to be forgotten and all his data should be deleted, right? Consent of people to use their data. Now, does does any company ask for consent to use the data? Yes. But if you don't consent, they don't let you use their services, right? So what happens is it's a forced consent of people to use the data, which is not very ethical again. How ethical is politics? So here in this particular case, a lot of electoral manipulations have been highlighted. And how ethical is politics anyway? Like the political parties are using such data analytics firms to target each other and to modify the result of the democratic elections, right? So do you think they are following any ethical code of conduct? Is there any ethical code of conduct that should be applicable to these politicians? And if we get to know that they have not followed such an ethical code of conduct, should they be penalized? Should they be barred from election? All these are ethical issues that we have to think about. Absence of free will. So when these companies use choices and their data to nudge a person ever so slightly to change his choices, this is basically cerebral hacking or hacking of a person's brain using little behavioral nudges, right? So in a lot of ads you might just see junk food, and even though you eat perfectly healthy diets, you might be tempted to begin eating junk foods because of the number of ads that you are seeing related to a particular thing, right? Stakeholders and their interests. So the number one stakeholder is users of Facebook. So what are their interests? It's protection of their data. They don't want their data to be misused. Then informed consent of use of their data. They might be interested in a particular survey, so they should be consulted before every use of their data, right? Whether they want their data to be used for that purpose or not. Privacy, control over what to disclose to third parties. So here Facebook has just given all of its users data away to third parties, right? Without even asking for permission from the users of Facebook. Then free will. So because of behavioral modification or nudging, there is no free will, and users of Facebook want free will in their choices, right? They want to make an informed decision. They don't want any psychological manipulation happening. So the public, they deserve to know the truth, what exactly has happened in these elections, and they deserve to exercise informed choices based on the merits of the issue and not psychological manipulation. So what they want to do is vote on the basis of merits of the candidates and what is the truth, and not on the basis of manipulating them psychology to believe who is the better candidate. The next stakeholder is the data analytics companies like Cambridge Analytica. What they want is to use as much data as possible, to mine them and predict patterns of behavior so that they can profit from it, right? So they want to customize targeting of communication to nudge the target to respond in a particular way. Basically, they want to psychologically manipulate people and they want to achieve their ends, whatever is profitable for them by doing this. And they are doing this for particular clients, so their interest is in meeting the objectives of clients. And the main objective of any corporate company is to earn profits, which is the objective of these data analytics companies as well. Facebook. So Facebook's main interest is in preservation of trust and of its users. Otherwise, the reputation of Facebook might just be so severely affected that people start uh, might stop using Facebook at all, right? So there might be an exodus of people from Facebook, and so the reputation risk of Facebook taking its users' data privacy carelessly is huge. Next is they should have control over how third parties use its data. So here, for no fault of Facebook, the third parties like Cambridge Analytica have used the data available with Facebook for their own benefits, right? And Facebook is also paying the price for this. Managing privacy of user data on the one hand and business interest on the other. So Facebook's main source of revenue is selling the data for earning profit, right? And one of its major concerns is to manage privacy of user data so that it stays protected, right? These are two conflicting issues, and Facebook has to deal with both the things because its interests lie in both. Okay, so now next part of the question is what are the steps that you will take as COO of Facebook? COO is Chief Operating Officer. So basically, the question is asking you to identify things which you will be doing in the operations aspect of this particular case, right? So the first thing that you should do is undertake a thorough investigation into the happening of events, because Facebook has been caught off guard. They completely denied these allegations because they were also not aware of what is happening. So undertake a thorough investigation into what has happened. Then identify how the crisis precipitated. So they want to understand how the crisis has occurred. And was this in accordance with the contract of Cambridge Analytics with Facebook? They have a contract with Cambridge Analytica, right? So was this particular thing in accordance with the contract? If it was in accordance with the contract, then you need to find out loopholes and plug them. So what are the deficiencies or shortcomings or pitfalls in the contract that have been exploited by Cambridge Analytica? If it was not in accordance with the contract, then the company can sue Cambridge Analytica for breach of the contract and ask for damages for the adverse impact on Facebook's reputation, right? If this is not mentioned in the contract, then Facebook can take a stern action against Cambridge Analytica for breach of the agreement, right? Institute a mechanism to monitor usage of information by third parties. Now, once they have cleared up the mess that has been generated, they should think about how to prevent this from happening in the future. So the CEO will establish a mechanism to keep checks and balances on usage of information by the third parties. Finally, identify other potential areas of vulnerability and institute a team to find out solutions for the same. So this is just one instance of such a data leak happening, and there could be other areas as well from where data privacy might be getting hampered, and as COO, you should institutionalize a team to do research and development in this particular aspect. Coming to the last part of the question, as CEO of Cambridge Analytica, will you justify what your company does? And you have to give reasons behind it, right? So here the key point to understand is that you are the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, right? So you have to think like him. Please don't think from the perspective of a government servant. You are the CEO of this particular company. So since I took up the job as CEO of Cambridge Analytica, I do not think that data analytics is unethical, right? Because he is doing that job. It is only when he finds it ethical that he has taken up that job, right? There's a lot of potential in data mining and analytics, which any employee of a data analytics company or whoever is working in a data analytics field will agree that there is a lot of good potential in data mining and analytics, right? After getting to know the public has not been accepting of our methods, I would definitely try to modify the cases that the company picks up, right? So here he is on the one hand denying that his company does not do anything wrong, but he's also saying that since the public does not like our methods, we will definitely try to modify or change the cases that we do so that it is in line with the public or social expectations. It might be more effective if we were able to project our candidates' credentials to the voters and market them better. So instead of using psychological manipulation or behavioral nudging, using data analytics, it will be more effective if they just customize their marketing of the candidates and project their credentials favorably to the voters, right? I will also try to diversify our business into healthcare data mining, etc., so that our data analytics capabilities are utilized optimally to the benefit of mankind. So this business is only related to elections consultancy, but he can diversify it into healthcare and try to find out solutions for the diseases, right? If it is so good at doing such a thing, maybe use that particular capability to perform some things or to take up projects which are in the public's benefit, right? Now we move on to case study 2. Here we have another issue. You are the district collector of a district where genetically modified crops are being grown illegally. So this case study is about GM crops and they are being grown illegally in a district, and you are the district collector of this particular district, right? These GM crops have not been approved by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change for commercialization and planting or food and feed use. So these crops have not been tested, have not been screened through the committee of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and it is not allowed to use them for planting, for production of food and for feeding the animals or for any sort of commercial activity, right? The farmers are getting better prices for their quality, facing lesser pests due to the use of GM crops, and crop disease occurrence is also reduced. So here there are three benefits that the farmers are getting by the use of these crops, which shows why farmers are using these particular crops in the first place. One is they are getting better prices for the quality. Second is that they are facing lesser pests due to the use of GM crops. And the third thing is that crop disease occurrence has reduced. However, since the GM crops have not gone through the entire approval process, they have not been tested thoroughly and have not faced the screening committee, right? So as already mentioned, they have not been tested properly, right? So their side effects on the environment or impact on the health of its consumers, whether animals or humans, is not known. So now any potential side effects that this particular GM crop can have is not known because it has not been tested properly. So you try to persuade the farmers to stop the usage of these crops, but they are no mood to listen. So for the first time, the farmers have found a magical solution for their issues in crop production, and when you try to persuade them, they are not willing to listen to you. So there are two parts in this particular case study. Part number one is delineate the ethical issues involved in this case, and part B is what are the measures that you will take to deal with the situation, right? So number one is that what are the ethical issues involved, and number two is that the measures that you take to deal with the situation. It's a 20 marks question, so you need to distribute the answer equally between these two subparts. Coming to the analysis, you are the district collector, right? So whatever action you take has to be in accordance with your powers and responsibilities as a district collector. Now, the district where genetically modified crops are being grown illegally. So, in your district, these crops are being grown illegally, and there is no regulation of these crops, right? Which means that these crops are being grown in places where you have no idea, and it has already started to interfere with the natural ecosystem process, and it might just spread like an invasive species. It has not been approved by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change for commercialization and planting or food and feed use. So the approval process has not completed. It has not even entered the testing process supposedly. Then farmers are getting better prices for their quality, facing lesser pest and crop disease occurrence has reduced. So these are the benefits of using these GM crops, which is why the farmers are hell bent on using them. It has not gone through the entire process. It has not been tested thoroughly and has not faced the screening committee at all. Right, so we know nothing about these crops, whether it's good for human health or good for animal health as feed. We know nothing about it because it has not faced any committee. Now, the side effects on the environment or impact on health of its consumers is not known. So, you as district collector persuade the farmers to stop the usage of these crops, but they are not willing to listen to you. Now, what are the ethical issues involved here? So, issue number one is scientific innovation versus natural systems. So, the one thing is that should you use science to modify the natural processes that nature has, or should you let the nature balance deal with all such situations, right? So this is a very important ethical issue because you are in a way acting like God in changing the attributes of a particular plant or the crop in this case, and you are going to be impacting millions of people who consume it and millions of animals who cannot even blame you for any side effects that they might have because of this. No one even would come to know what has caused a particular side effect, right? So scientific innovation should be responsible. It should be implemented after thorough analysis and testing, and natural systems also have their own balancing processes, so they should be modified only if extremely important, right? Then the second ethical issue is economic interest of farmers versus public health. So it is in the farmers' interest to plant these crops because it is helping them with production, and it is helping them with the different problems that they were facing in crop production. And on the other hand is public health might get severely impacted or affected by the use of these crops. So this is an important issue. Then regulatory issues versus growth and innovation. So should regulation try to control all such genetically modified crops, or should it let the creativity of different private sector companies or research organizations take the lead in deciding what should be introduced or not? Growth and innovation, right? So this is another ethical issue, being ethical versus being pragmatic. So even if these companies know that they have not completed the entire screening process, still they are selling these GM crop seeds to the farmers for use in their crop production, right? So this is just being pragmatic to earn profits. It is not being ethical. If they were ethical, they would not have started producing such crops on a commercial scale. Then you have long drawn trials versus quick commercialization. So whether long drawn trials are necessary, or should you take the advantage of such innovation and quickly commercialize it and start earning profits, right? So this is another issue which is involved. Then you have short-term welfare versus long-term welfare. So short-term welfare of farmers and the profits that they are earning versus what could happen in terms of long-term, their long-term welfare. They are growing genetically modified crops. Maybe these crops are pest resistant now. What if the pests were to adapt to this particular variety of crops and there is an even higher incidence of pests and occurrence of crop diseases? Then they will have to increase the amount of pesticides that they use, right? So what is the long-term welfare of a farmer in this? Then humans versus biodiversity. Now humans at least are deciding and calling the shots on whether to change a particular natural process or not. In biodiversity, plants and animals, they are just being imposed upon. These things are being imposed upon them, and if they face an invasive alien species, so it is just they don't have a say in it, right? So there's no free will of the biodiversity or the environment. Now you have benefits to food productivity versus protection of ecosystem. So there are a lot of benefits in the terms that the production of these GM crops is increasing, but the environmental ecosystem is getting impacted, right? So this is another ethical issue. Then you have reversible change versus irreversible change. Right, so use of insecticides or pesticides, this is something that is reversible. You might not use it in the next crop season. But changing the variety of crops and modifying its DNA is basically an irreversible change. Once that particular species starts growing in the field and you get seeds of that particular species only, you don't have any control over how that particular crop is being grown, right? Endemic species versus genetically modified species. So this is an ethical issue that we are creating. The competition between endemic species for survival and genetically modified species for resources like air and water is real. It is happening in the nature's delicate balance. And if something goes wrong, we are the ones to blame for it. So measures to be taken as district collector. First thing is, I cannot punish so many farmers for using such genetically modified crops. They may or may not even know about the dangers or the potential harm that they are creating, right? So I will conduct an inquiry to find out the source of these genetically modified crops. Who is producing these seeds? I want to find out that first. I will penalize the entity responsible for the production of GM crops without approval for food and feed under the relevant laws. So I will penalize whichever company is responsible for this production because they have not taken any approval under the relevant laws, right? So they are liable for punishment and damages. Next, to ensure that the public does not fall into this any further, I will create public awareness about the dangers of using untested GM crops, right? So you run a public awareness campaign, then you conduct an information and education campaign for the farmers to understand GM technology. So the farmers who are using this particular technology, they should understand completely the benefits and the dangers which are involved in this, and they should conduct an IEC campaign, right? Then next thing is that why are these farmers opting for this particular technology? It is because they are struggling with certain aspects of the crop production process where they are not able to find any alternative solutions, right? So you request Krishi Vigyan Kendras, which are present in most of the districts in India, to work out alternative solutions for the farmers' problems with respect to pest and crop diseases, right? Next, you get the GM crops, the crops which are being grown. So there are a few positive advantages of the crops that are being grown, but you don't know about the potential dangers, right? So you get it screened by the Committee of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, so that if it is actually beneficial, it can be introduced in the environment, right? Take measures to improve the productivity of farming, mechanization, providing safe insecticides, etc. So if you increase the productivity of farming, then farmers will be in a capacity to take informed good decisions. They will not be under the burden of doing whatever works for them just so that they can earn a little bit of money, right? Next is capacity building of farmers to understand reasons for appearance of pests and crop diseases. So the farmers should be educated on why, based on what factors and in which conditions do the pests appear and do the diseases happen, right? So that they can prevent those conditions from happening or take an alternative way of crop production. Next, you create post harvest storage infrastructure so that there is minimum food wastage. This way the shelf life of the food increases and the farmers remuneration also increases. And finally, you create opportunities for farmers. It can be in any field. Here I have mentioned food processing, so that farmers can get more remuneration for their produce. You can think about other alternatives as well. Now we come to practice case study 1. So during the recent coronavirus pandemic, vaccine development was fast tracked as there was no cure available for COVID-19. Due to its virulent nature, some nations jumped onto the first available vaccine, which showed even little signs of providing immunity against COVID-19. The complete phases of clinical trials were not completed and vaccines were introduced for the public. In this context, please answer the following question. So, this is a very recent and relevant issue, and it is about the pandemic which still is going on in the country and all over the world, right? And this is something which has been discussed in the newspapers on a daily basis, so you don't need any specific preparation to answer this particular question. It is only what you have gathered from the newspaper that will help you analyze this particular case study and answer it. So there are 4 parts to this question, which means this question being a 20 marker, you can equally divide the points among these 4 parts. So the first is, what are the ethical issues involved in this case? And delineate the ethical issues in conducting a clinical trial. So this is actually different from what is there in the case study. In a general clinical trial, what are the issues, right? Next is, mention the options available for conducting a clinical trial. In your opinion, who should the clinical trial be conducted on? So here, the first part of the question does not make it clear what exactly they are asking, but the second part of the question makes it amply clear that basically they want who should be the target population, right? So this again is a general question. And finally, according to you, what should have been the priority of vaccination in India? Now this is related to this COVID-19 case study only. So you need to find out um, who, according to you, should be vaccinated first and who should be second, who should be third, right? And they have not asked what exactly happened. What they have asked is, what should be the priority according to you? Please attempt this particular case study and send it to the Sunya team for evaluation. Now practice case study 2. This is about artificial intelligence. Humans who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded by artificial intelligence. These are the words of renowned scientist Professor Stephen Hawking. Please highlight the ethical dimensions in the following threats imposed by the development of advanced artificial intelligence. Right? So here the question is about artificial intelligence development in a more advanced way, And Professor Stephen Hawking has already warned us about the dangers of advanced artificial intelligence. Here they have listed 6 things that we need to address in this particular case study. And they are following threats which have been imposed by the development of advanced artificial intelligence, and you have to highlight the ethical dimensions, right? One is risk of unemployment, exacerbating inequalities, discriminating robots, data privacy, artificial intelligence turning against humans, right? So all these issues are being discussed regularly in the newspaper. It is not something which is unique or something which is very technical that you have to study. Everyone should be aware that because of artificial intelligence usage in the industrial processes, there's a lot of risk of unemployment. It will be exacerbating inequalities because only the people who bring capital and technology will be at an advantage, and people who did salary jobs will be at a disadvantage here because they will be replaced by artificial intelligence. Discriminating robots, basically whoever designs the artificial intelligence, his biases would get transferred to the artificial intelligence as well. So there will be discriminating robots. This is discussed in the newspapers quite often, so you should keep an eye out on such articles. See, you don't need to have very technical knowledge of how artificial intelligence is made, what are the recent developments, what are the technicalities involved, but you should be aware of the different issues plaguing a particular technology, right? Then data privacy, because artificial intelligence is based on machine learning, which uses a lot of data, and AI turning against humans. Once the artificial intelligence is developed to an advanced level, it might just take a will of its own and design whatever it wants, and then they might just turn against humans, right? So finally, F part of the question is, do you think AI should be treated as global commons, or should it be left to the private sector to develop it without any regulation? So for instance, space has been accepted to be a global commons because of the dangers of misuse of space that it poses to human existence, right? So should artificial intelligence be treated in a similar way, or should we just leave it as it is now and let it develop without any regulation, right? This is a 20-mark question. You have 6 parts in this particular question, and you should be answering each part proportionately, right? So divide your answer equally among all the 6 subparts. Please attempt this question and send it to Sunya team for evaluation. Thank you. I hope that this particular session on case studies based on technological issues is